Garbage to Gardens is an initiative which has been started by a group of interested individuals who wanted to promote the idea of composting. We are currently on a land in Mgarr, Malta, and this land is called the Creativity Vortex. So we are experimenting in different techniques, organic techniques, sustainable techniques, in order to educate the public.
We were given the opportunity to be able to practice different types of compost systems and to be able to test different types of compost and what we can do in order to have the most successful compost. The aim of the campaign is to offer some information, some education, help to people who are interested in compost, and also explain to people why it's so important to compost and why it's going to benefit our environment and why it should be something that is part of our everyday lives.
We are currently shooting this video in order to educate the public on the different ways of composting.
The Mgarr Creativity Vortex and Permaculture Research Farm is a space provided by the Mgarr NGO.
It's an experimental permaculture farm where we grow and we build using organic and sustainable techniques. Compost is the natural breakdown of any organic matter. This organic matter, this organic waste that we usually discard in the kitchen, can be placed inside a compost bin, and the natural breakdown of microorganisms which are present inside this compost bin will render that what was once waste into a rich fertilizer.
Compost is a really simple process. Basically, it's a mix of nitrogen and carbon-based materials.
All you need to do is put these materials into a compost bin and make sure there is enough aeration and moisture by adding water and oxygen.
Compost is based on a balance, a ratio. 4 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen.
Carbon-based materials include wood chips, sawdust, newspaper, paper shreddings, cardboard, magazines, ashes, straw, leaves and weeds, dried grass, tea leaves.
Carbon in itself, in the breakdown, would result in a higher mass, will create more volume to the soil, whereas the nitrogen, the greens, would give the nutrients necessary to have the perfect balance.
Nitrogen-based materials include vegetable waste, grass cuttings, fruit waste as well. Anything basically that you can cook with at home, like organic waste that was once alive. Even using tea bags, eggshells, a lot of things that we have at home that we regard as normal garbage.
If we have too much nitrogen, we're going to end up with bad smells.
What's also important is that there are certain things that we shouldn't put in the compost. Mostly acidic things, so this includes cooked food, meat and dairy products as well. We try not to include grains and any sort of foods that were processed.
More carbon and the right amount of nitrogen then would have the right balance of volume, and this volume will obviously neutralize the odors.
So if we're putting a bucket, for example, of vegetables, we need 4 times as much cardboard.
What is also very important inside the compost bin is that the compost bin needs to be well aerated. There needs to be oxygen, and oxygen flow is inside the compost bin.
Once your compost is ready, all you need to do is gather it out from the bottom, and depends if you're at home, you can have your pots or your small garden beds, and you can sprinkle the compost on the soil.
So there are 3 types of compost bins that we are actually using here on site.
We have the cold compost, the hot compost and the worm bins.
The cold compost bin takes around 6 months to complete. It uses the same balance, it uses the same ratio. However, it does not require any input from our end, except adding the right balance and the right mix.
Vermicompost is a compost that's been digested by earthworms, better known as compost worms, because they're earthworms that actually live in compost. And it's one of the most amazing fertilizers, one of the most powerful fertilizers we can get. And essentially it's made by worms eating compost and then putting the compost, and it comes out as vermicompost. For people living indoors in apartments who don't have garden space or balcony space or even roof space, one can actually purchase a ready-made commercial worm bin. Basically what it is, it's a bin with worms in it. You buy it off the shelf and you start feeding it your vegetable waste from your apartment. It's a very, very practical way of disposing your vegetable waste. And besides that, it gives you excellent benefits like vermicompost for your garden. It can even give you a leachate which is called worm pea or something like that, which is also an excellent fertilizer. So for most people living in confined spaces where they don't have open space with the house, a larger worm bin, we can use these apartment wormeries. Essentially, you know, all vegetable waste, uncooked vegetable waste can go in there, except for anything that's very, very acidic. So we've got to keep in mind like orange peel, lemon peel, the citruses aren't very good. Obviously meat can't go in there because it will smell and form maggots and things like that. As long as we, you know, people know essentially the basics of maintaining a worm colony, it's very easy to do. Once you get into the system, it's very easy to do then, yeah.
A hot compost pile usually takes around 18 days to break down, 18 days or more. And the idea of the hot compost pile is that it creates that at this ratio and at 1 meter cube, we can create a temperature in the core of a hot compost pile up to 60 degrees Celsius. This results in a fast breakdown of our compost pile, but it would require more input from our end. It would need us to mix the pile every 4 days in the first few days and mix the pile again every 2 days until the end of the 18-day process.
Normally when we want to grow vegetables at home, we need to add a fertilizer to the soil, to add nutrients to the ground. What we normally do is we go and we buy a chemical fertilizer. It's not always the best thing to give to the soil. Compost is the natural way of doing this.
When we use our own vegetable waste and create our own compost, we know what we're eating. Agricultural practices nowadays use chemical fertilizers, and this is obtained through petrochemical processing. Composting has various advantages. One of them is obviously that we could use this natural fertilizer, place it in our pots, in our gardens, in our fields. If we look at the agricultural practices, when we are going to start planting our crop in fields, we remove all the plants and we remove all the trees from the surrounding areas. And what we're doing is basically we're taking away all the nutrients that are present in the soil, because the plant and the tree is what stores all these nutrients. Once we remove all those nutrients and burn them off, give them to animals, what we're doing is we're depleting the nutrients in the soil. The soil becomes infertile. This is why we need to look at nature. This is why we need to follow nature's example, because nature has always been there to show us the way. We have just distanced ourselves from it. So if we look at forests, forests do not need our input. Forests are sustainable as they are. Forests recreate nutrients within the soil by themselves, the vegetation falling to the ground, breaking down of organic matter. And this is what we're doing with compost. We are just mimicking what nature has been doing for millions and millions of years. So it is very important for us, even on a small scale, to do our own part. And it all starts from the kitchen.
A lot of people ask me, why should I compost? Firstly, I tell them because it's fun, especially when you're dealing with worms. And of course, then there is the fact that compost, most of it will, if we don't use it as compost, vegetable waste and cardboard and manure, these are all things that people are trying to get rid of, their waste. At home, before I started composting, a lot of my waste was vegetable waste and a lot of things that could be reused again and turned back into compost. And for me, that's such a beautiful cycle, that we're trying to get rid of something. It's a waste material and we're going to put it back into the ground to grow food again. So that's why I think it's so important to compost, because we're sort of recycling, but we're producing food, which is so important. And we're adding nutrients to the soil.
You can use this waste to grow your own vegetables, grow your own produce, grow your own food on your balconies, on your rooftops. It is one of the most important things we need to do nowadays, because there's a growing awareness of the quality of food that we are eating.
At the Grassy Hopper, we've come up with an awesome solution to a very common problem within the catering industry, which is high levels of food and packaging waste. At the Grassy Hopper, we use packaging which is completely compostable. It's actually made from cornstarch, and if composted properly, in 3 months, these two can become soil again. So in collaboration with Garbage Gardens, we compost all of our waste. So the food remains and the packaging that you use for your meal, instead of being a waste and filling up a landfill, is actually going to become a resource and can be used to rehabilitate our soil and grow organic vegetables, which you can then come back and eat at your next visit.
The whole composting process in itself can make a change. From your own home, you can make your own change, your own little change, as little as it could be. The changes that we can do are small changes, but if everyone does them, it's for the better of the planet.